So this is our weekly Q&A. Some good questions for this week. A couple to start off with, dealing with the 2000 election in Florida. Why was Bush elected despite having evidence that in the recount in Florida, Al Gore actually won? And this is something Gore will regret for the rest of his life. But why exactly did he only request a recount in those 4 counties? Why not play it safe and go for the entire state if he knew there was some sketchy handlings of the ballots? And again, to review the map, so Gore requested recounts in these 4 counties. So these 3 southern Florida counties, Miami, Palm Beach, and Broward. The darker the shade, the heavier the vote margin for each of the candidates. So Gore was really going with the heavy ones here. And then this Mid-Coast County, Volusia County, which was also a vote-rich county. You'll see only one other heavily Democratic Florida county way up here on the Georgia border, but there weren't many votes in that county. So basically what the Gore campaign did, was to look at the Florida map and to say, all right, we're going to request a recount of Florida from the 4 most populous and most heavily Democratic counties in the state. And this was a disastrous mistake for 3 reasons. First, it created the impression, which was frankly a wholly accurate perception, that the Gore people were trying to game the system. That is, like, they didn't care about voters up here, say in northern Florida, whose votes might have been undercounted. They only cared about Democratic voters whose votes had been undercounted. So that was the first problem. It caused a PR problem. Secondly, it created it at least opened the door to a legal problem. One of the successful arguments that the Bush team ultimately made was an equal protection argument. That is, that voters in these 4 counties, these 4 Democratic counties, were had greater rights than voters in other parts of the state, because their votes would be counted and then recounted and recounted again, whereas, again, a voter, say, on the panhandle of Florida wouldn't be afforded that right. And third, and I think perhaps most interestingly, was the error in just not going for it, going for the entire state. The key to this question is, why not play it safe and go for the entire state? What Gore mistakenly thought he was doing was playing it safe and just going for the Democratic counties. And in the last 20 years, there's been some pretty interesting research on this. There was another very, very tight Senate election in Minnesota. Al Franken, some of you might remember, the comedian who then became a senator and had to resign. Franken won in a recount, and Franken did precisely what Gore did not do. He requested a recount of the entire state. And one of the things that the new literature has been suggesting, is that generally, all other things being equal, Democrats very, very, very marginally benefit in recounts, because their constituencies tend to be younger, so they're less experienced voters, and also the very poorly educated tend to skew Democratic, and oftentimes you'll get people who don't precisely follow the ballot rules. And so let's say you have a county where there are 10,000 voters and they vote 50-50 Democrat and Republican. And then you do a recount and you find that there are 100 voters that mistakenly their ballots were not counted, but they actually should have been counted. Those voters often will break like 60-40 Democrat or 65-35 Democrat. So if Gore had requested recount in these areas up here in northern Florida, it wasn't that he would have carried any of these areas, but he would have done better in them than he had done in the past. So it was a PR mistake, it was a legal mistake, and it was ultimately a tactical mistake. And then harking back to this first question of why was Bush elected despite having evidence that in the recount of Florida, Al Gore actually won, that evidence did not come to light until September of 2001. By that point, Bush had been president for 9 months. The election was over. So Gore only had one chance. Now, it is entirely possible, if Gore had requested a statewide recount from the start that the Bush team would have gone to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court still would have found a way, 5-4, to shut down the recount. But the subsequent history, I think, would have been much different. It would have been clearly a power grab by the Supreme Court, whereas what really happened was both sides, Democrats and Republicans, were gaming the system, and ultimately the Bush people did a better job at it than the Gore people did. Second question. In essence, Hillary refused to display records and Bill had trouble keeping his self-control together. Were they just being regular human beings, or were they actually corrupt because of future positions, i.e. in the Oval Office? And then a second question on the Clinton impeachment. Clearly the wasn't perfect. It was put on trial. Republicans thought his behavior was wrong, correct. Why aren't we saying the same things with regards to current Republicans towards Trump? I think a couple of things here. The first is on the first question. The defenders of the Clintons in the 1990s, and to some extent, I think defenders of the Clintons since that time, have argued that they were unfairly persecuted by the right-wing media, and clearly the conservative media does not like the Clintons and doesn't cover them particularly fairly. But there was a second kind of criticism against the Clintons, which is basically, what we're doing, everyone's doing. Yes, we cut ethical corners, but all politicians do so. We're being held to a higher standard. And I think that's an argument that after 8 years of the Obama administration is just, it's not a tenable argument any longer. I mean, you can agree with Obama's policies, disagree with Obama's policies, and I fall into both camps depending on the specific policy. But this was a very ethical administration as a whole, and certainly the president and the first lady during the Obama years, their personal ethics were pristine, and I think that's really been the shift with regards to the Clintons, not just nationally but among Democrats as a whole. Their fallback argument was, we're being unfairly persecuted for what all politicians do. And again, after 8 years of the Obamas, that's just, all politicians do not behave as the Clintons did with regards to cutting ethical corners. With regards to the second question, I think the easiest answer to that is this video. So this is a chart of the American political divide from 1994 to 2017, and it's grown even wider since 2017. Although I haven't seen an updated version of the chart. And you see here in 1994, just a few years before the Clinton impeachment. So here's the median Democrat, and this is it's a scope where we show on the left side of the screen you see consistently liberal positions. On the right side of the screen you see people who take consistently conservative positions. Median Democrat in 1994 is right in the middle, between consistently liberal and consistently conservative. And median Republican is a bit on the center-right side. But again, there's a lot of overlap here, you can see in this kind of dark blue area, between Democrats and Republicans. So let's look at how this has evolved between 1994 and 2017. So remember where we started in 1994. Look at where we are in 2017. And again, by 2020, the median Republican would be further to the right, and the median Democrat would be further to the left. So in a society which over the last 25 years has become almost entirely polarized on virtually all aspects of politics. I mean, think of what we're going through now. We're having this, this national debate over the post office. The post office. You would think of this as nonpartisan as issue, as yet everything now is partisan. So people who took one position in the Clinton years, they condemned Clinton as immoral, utterly silent on Trump's immoral actions. people who said, it's unfair to criticize a president for personal immoralities during the Clinton administration, have spent the last 4 years criticizing Trump's personal immoralities. And this is, just a personal opinion here, not a healthy situation for a democracy where so many positions seem to be viewed through this exclusively partisan lens. But this chart, and I'm going to play it one more time, really does give a sense of just how dramatically the two sides in American politics have pulled apart in the last 25 years. And again, there's just no sign that they're coming close together. So as if we project forward the next 10, 12, 15 years in terms of American politics, this is a phenomenon with which we will continue to deal. And for the topic of our course, one of the manifestations of this is that Supreme Court nominations become these titanic battles because the two parties are choosing their Supreme Court justices from the left or right fringe of their overall ideological constituency. So again, this is a visualization, but it's a nice way of seeing how we've become more partisan as a country over time. Next question. Remember Bush election, the chaos which ensued. For some reason, I'm thinking we may experience the same thing in this coming 2020 election. What are my thoughts? I would say that um, the chances are likely, but not certain. So, if as things stand now, Nate Silver, who's this political prognosticator now with ABC News, has just come out with his model. He gives Trump a 1 in 4 chance of winning the election. That seems to me to be high, but nonetheless, he's very good at this sort of stuff. But what Silver has also pointed out is that there's more than a 1 in 4 chance, not just of a Biden victory, but of a Biden blowout. So it's entirely possible on election night 2020, we will discover by 8:30 that Biden has carried Florida. We will discover that by 9 o'clock, Biden has carried North Carolina, two southern states that went for Trump, in which case the election is over. And so all of the difficulties in terms of vote countings in other states will be immaterial. If Biden wins those two states, that means that he's going to win the Midwestern states. He's going to win with around 400 electoral votes. But imagine a slightly different scenario. It's 8:30 on election night, and Trump has carried Florida, and Trump has also carried North Carolina. And these are two states that have an extensive mail ballot tradition, and so mail-in ballot tradition, and have an ability to count mail ballots relatively quickly. So I don't think there's going to be any difficulty in either of those states counting. If that's happened, look at what we saw in New York, where it was, 6 weeks before two primaries, one in the Bronx and Westchester County, one on the east side of Manhattan and Greenpoint and Williamsburg in Brooklyn. It was 6 weeks before those primaries were counted because the Election Commission was not prepared to handle mail-in ballots, which traditionally are not used in New York State, as they traditionally are not widely used in many Midwestern states, which are battleground states in 2020. So this is option or potential problem one is just the post office becoming overwhelmed, quite apart from Trump's machinations with regards to the post office. The second is that one of the negative elements the 2000 election revealed for all of us were these highly partisan election lawyers who'll be fighting over every single ballot, contesting everything in Florida. Try to imagine something like we witnessed in the Bush-Gore contest of 2000, where there was this battle over 4 counties in one state, just these 4 counties. Try to imagine that we're seeing a similar thing in the weeks after the 2020 election in 9 or 10 states, every county in every state. And if that happens, I would agree. The potential here is for a kind of catastrophic breakdown. Again, I don't think that's going to happen because the way the polls now are indicating is that it's going to be a relatively comfortable Biden win. but it's certainly not inconceivable. We could deal with that, and at least for all of us, I mean, I think hopefully in this class, we've learned a little bit about Bush versus Gore, and the 2000 election problems are child's play, I think, considered to compared to what we would see there. Last question is on the greenhouse effect. Has there been any academic writing or theory about it, more an invention of current political landscape? What do I think about it? And are conservatives possibly on the losing end of arguments surrounding issues like prayer in schools, marriage equality for substantive reasons? All excellent questions. There has been academic writing, and there's a lot of poli-sci literature that charts Supreme Court justices, and this is one such chart. So all of these squiggly lines here on the chart, and I'll go through them in a second, track the individual voting patterns of separate justices over individual Supreme Court terms. If you go towards the bottom, it's a more liberal justice. And if you go towards the top, it's a more conservative justice. And the first thing that you should notice is that there are relatively few ultra liberal justices or ultra conservative justices. In fact, there have been only two justices who regularly go beyond the 4 scale, and that's Justice Douglas, who was an appointee of FDR, and right at the end of his career, Justice Marshall, who always was a very liberal justice but drifted way to the left towards the end of his career. For the most part, justices stay relatively not so much in the middle, because someone like Douglas is extreme liberal because he's descending from all kinds of cases where the other vote was 8-1. But beyond that, take a look at the chart in these more recent periods, and one of the things that you'll see is that there generally is a pattern where justices become more liberal the longer they serve on the court, even if that progression is not a particularly noticeable one. So, for instance, Justice Stevens. So he was appointed by Ford. He's the only Ford nominee to the court. And you see, just after he's appointed here in 1975, he's basically right at the median ideologically. He's neither liberal nor conservative. By the time he leaves the court, or by the time we get to the mid-90s, and he stays on the court until 2009, so his last 15 years, he is a very, very liberal justice. Same thing here you see with Justice Souter. So Souter, who's a H.W. Bush appointee, Souter is actually a conservative justice at his start, and let's trace the line here, becoming a quite liberal justice, voting basically along the lines of Justice Ginsburg and more liberal than Justice Breyer was. Or Justice Kennedy. Kennedy is a little bit trickier here, but Kennedy here is in this green line. And you see he started out as a moderately conservative justice, but gradually moved over, and in a couple of terms late in his time on the Supreme Court, he actually tended towards a more liberal line. And we've seen this also from Chief Justice Roberts. And if you extended this to the 2019-2020 term, Roberts may very well tick a little bit below the liberal line. Whereas you see very, very few conservatives, people becoming more conservative the longer they're on the court. Basically, it's Justice Alito and no one else in the last 30 years. So there is a phenomenon here in which justices become more liberal. Now, the greenhouse effect seems to me a remarkably uncharitable aspect of that explanation for that phenomenon, but not in some ways a wholly wrong one. Basically, what the greenhouse effect is saying is that justices tend to position themselves in a certain atmosphere. That is, that they're in Washington, D.C., and that they spend away time, say, in elite law schools or in the Aspen Ideas Conference or among a certain kind of intellectual elite, which tends to be to the left of the country, at least on social issues, if not on economic issues. And that as justices spend more time in these groups, they gradually come to adopt their ideas. That's basically what the greenhouse effect argument is. Now, the flip side of this argument is basically what the question is posing at the end, which is that on issues like prayer in schools, marriage equality, these kinds of questions, the liberal side of the debate simply has the better constitutional argument. I think certainly on these two examples, prayer in schools and marriage equality, it's the in legal terms, these were no-brainers. The legal arguments against both were very, very weak because, in effect, the opposition was mostly religious in both cases, and the court could not take a religious argument. So I think there's something to both of these things. All that said, one of the things that we've seen from conservatives is this idea, and we're going to see it from liberals if and when Biden wins. The Biden nominee is going to be a down the line liberal who will make Sotomayor look as if she's conservative. One of the things we're seeing from the parties in judicial nominations now is to appoint people whose votes are basically certain, who are just have kind of closed in ideological views, and who will not evolve or devolve depending on your ideological viewpoint, according to the greenhouse effect. And this is it's a troubling pattern, but it fits into this broader pattern that I was talking about earlier, with regards to the polarization of American society. So that's about all we have for this week's question and answer session, which is our final question and answer session. Thank you all for the course of the semester and giving the questions, which were excellent questions. Hope everyone is staying safe, and I will see you all on Monday.